Hey y'all, welcome to Back Porch Cooking and Reminiscing. We're the Morgans and we're happy to have y'all here with us today. Remember to hit that subscribe, like, and hit the bell button. Hey y'all, bet you're wondering why we're doing the video tonight by candlelight. Well, it's because it's almost Halloween. So we thought we'd do a little video about spooky things that have happened while we were in the restaurant business. And hey, if y'all got any spooky stories you'd like to tell us, go down to the comments, leave us a little story in the comments, tell us anything you may have that's kind of spooky. All right, so let's get started here with our first story. It happened back when we were first in the food business and we had the food truck. And we would come in every evening after we'd been out and we'd park the food truck. And where we parked it at, it was about, probably 30, 35 yards from the house. And at night, that area was not lit up at all, had hardly no light at all to it. So we would do the cleanup and get it ready to go out the next day. Well, that particular day, about probably 9 or 10 o'clock that night, I asked my son, I said, "Did you remember to turn off the main breaker on the truck?" He couldn't remember if he did or if he didn't. So he went out to the truck, took his flashlight with him, checked to see if he'd turned that main breaker off. Wasn't just a minute or two, and he was back in the house. And he asked his mother, he said, "While I was out there," he said, "were you calling me?" And she said, "No, I haven't been out of the house." And he said, "Well, while I was on the truck," he said, "I heard a woman's voice calling my name." And he said, "I got off that truck as quick as I could and came on back to the house." Now, that in itself is a little spooky, but now what makes it even a little more spooky is that that house, about another 40 or 50 yards up from where that truck was parked at, there was a family cemetery. And that cemetery had headstones from all the way back into the early 1800s. So who knows? I guess maybe one of the ladies that was buried there in that cemetery, maybe she was out for a stroll that night and decided she would try to get my son's attention. But after that, he didn't care to go back to the truck at night. He always made sure he got that main breaker flipped off. So our next story, it's got a earlier beginning than from when we were in the restaurant business. But so I'm going to give you the build up to what happened. Back, I'm not even sure of when, but as many of you know, we had a restaurant in Monteagle that was in the old Dairy Queen building. Well, way before we ever moved the restaurant into that building, there was a business there called Clock Dock. And the guy who ran it, he's a friend of mine, and he actually asked me if I'd come to work for him at one point in time. So I did. I went to work for him, and but he always did his work late at night. We would start at 9 or 10 o'clock at night and not finish until 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. That was he just enjoyed working the night hours rather than working daytime hours. So this one particular night, we were in this building. Remember now, it's the old Dairy Queen building that we later have a restaurant in. But we were in there, and on the back side of the building, there was like three different rooms. I was in the middle room, and he was in the room on the very far end. So I'm standing there doing something. I don't even remember what, but I look up and I see these two shadows go down the hallway. I thought somebody was in the building. And of course, I know that normally he would lock the door, the front door, so nobody could come in. And there was nobody else in the building except for me and him. So I walk out of the room that I'm in, go down the hallway, go around through the back room, and it circles around back out into the front, and then comes back around to the rooms that we were in. Nobody there. Checked the door was locked. So I go in the room that he was in, and I'm like, Bill, I just had something weird happen. And he says, what's that? And I said, well, I saw two shadows go down the hallway, and I said, I thought maybe you'd left the door unlocked and somebody had come in. And I said, but there's nobody there. And I said, one of the shadows, it was looked like a tall, maybe a man, and the other one looked shorter, like it was a woman. And he says, well, I sure am glad that somebody else has finally experienced this. He said, because a lot of times when I've been here at night by myself, he said, I feel like somebody is standing looking over my shoulder. He said, but I turn around, there's nobody ever there. So now the kind of spooky part of it, along with the shadows, is that the man and woman who actually owned the Dairy Queen, from what I've been told, I didn't know him personally, but from what I've been told, he was a tall man and she was a short woman. Hence, a tall shadow, a short shadow. So, don't know if we were being paid a visit by the old owners or what, but so that'll lead us into the story of what happened when we had the restaurant in there. So one night I was in there and I had something in the oven. I had two big pans, two big hotel pans in the oven, and was getting ready to take them out. They cooked for as long as they needed to cook, and it was time for them to come out. And this was fairly late at night. We had already closed and everything. So I open the oven door up. I reach in, I get the first pan. I turn around, walk over to the table and set it down. I turn around and go back to the oven. The second pan, which was all the way in the back of the oven, is now pulled all the way out to the front of the rack, just like somebody had pulled it out and had it sitting there waiting on me to pick it up and carry it to the table. So the first thing that came to my mind was what had happened years before that when I saw those two shadows go down the hallway. So I just said, thank you, Mr. and Ms. and their last names. I'm not going to call their names on the video. But I thanked them for their help. Told them I sure did appreciate them helping me out. And that's really the only time that I ever had any kind of an experience in that building. And that was the building in Monteagle. So after we moved out of that building there in Monteagle, we went to Cowan, Tennessee, and opened up in what was Boots and Brew at the time. And that building was built back in 1901, so well over 100-year-old building. So if you believe in the supernatural and so forth, which speaking of that, I'm wearing my supernatural shirt with Sam and Dean, one of my favorite TV shows. But anyway, if you believe in supernatural things, a lot of things can go on in a building that's over 100 years old. So, next couple of things that we're going to talk about didn't happen to me personally, but I do know the people that it did happen to. So, the first one is going to be about this young lady was in the restaurant. This is way before we ever owned it. This is maybe two or three previous owners. But she was in the restaurant and she was making biscuits one morning. She says around 5 o'clock. She said she looked up on the landing. There was a set of stairs going up out of the kitchen that went to the apartment. And she looked up. She said, standing on the landing was this man. He was dressed in blue jeans and a flannel shirt. And she said she knew there was nobody else in that building other than her, and that it scared her to death. But she says the only thing she could think to do was to look up at him and say, "Sir, I'm sorry, we're not open right now. You'll have to come back later." And she said that and looked back down at her biscuits, and she said when she looked back up again, he was gone. So that's a story that happened there in their building. As I say, I know the young lady that happened to. So there definitely are things that went on in our building there at Boots and Brew that was kind of spooky. I talked to one of the previous owners there. They had owned it 2 or 3 times back from when we took over, and she was telling me that her girls would be in the kitchen, or maybe they'd be out in the dining room, and they would hear someone call their name, and they would think that it was her calling for them to come either to the kitchen or come out to the dining room, whichever place that they weren't, to help her do something. So they would go and say, "Yeah, what did you need?" And she'd go, "I didn't need anything." They said, "Well, you called my name." And she'd say, "No, I didn't call your name." So they were hearing their names called, kind of like my son did uh, in that first story that we did. Another story that those folks that owned it had told me about. They said that they had like topiaries sitting in the corners of the dining room, and that even when they would turn them off, they'd come back in and the lights would be on. So then they started unplugging them, and they would come back in. They'd be plugged back in the wall, and the lights would be turned on. So there again, another spooky story of things that was going on in our building. They also told me that they actually had a paranormal investigator group come in, and that as they walked around the different parts of the building, they told them that there was several places in that building that they could feel a heavy presence of something paranormal. So I guess maybe that building was haunted. We got a lot of stories of buildings in that area around Cowan and around the railroad that supposedly were haunted. The only thing that I ever really experienced was sometimes the rooms when you go into a different room, you kind of get that feeling, that uneasy feeling that something wasn't quite right in that room. That did happen to me a lot, especially when I'd go back to what we call the bull room. There was a mechanical bull back there, and it just going back into that room and walking into it, you just kind of got a creepy feeling about it. And there's a couple other places in the building that I would feel that way. And talking about the bull room, there was we had cameras set up everywhere in the restaurant and in the other rooms of the building. And the only one that this ever happened in was that bull room. But you could walk back and look at the monitor and the cameras from the bull room. Of course, they were infrared, so there'd be no lights on in the bull room, but the cameras were still picking everything up. And you could see orbs just flying around all over the place in that bull room. And didn't happen every time that you went and looked at the camera, but several times that I went and checked that camera out, and you could see those orbs just moving all around in that room. So there again, if you believe in that, maybe that was some spirits in there. That's what I've always heard, that if you see orbs on camera, then there's spirits in there. So that's really about all that has happened with me in the restaurant there in Cowan. But I'm sure there are many other stories that I just haven't heard about. All right, so last two, I'm gonna give you a couple of quick ones that actually have happened to us in our home. We were living in Mont Eagle at the time. No, we were in Trace City at the time, and we had a set of they were like folding doors that separated the kitchen from the living room, and so one day I was there, or I had come home, and I walked in, and the doors were shut, and we never shut those doors. But I walked in, they were shut. My wife was actually gone. I think she was in Florida visiting with her mother. And so I didn't say anything to her about it. I just thought, well, kind of weird that those doors would be shut. So after she comes back home, maybe a few weeks later, she calls me one day at work and she says, when you left, did you shut those doors going into the living room from the kitchen? And I said, no, I didn't shut them when I left. She said, well, when I come back, she said, they were closed. And I said, yeah, I said, I had that happen to me while you were gone. Um, don't know why those doors were shut, but something other than either one of us shut those doors and there was nobody else in the house at the time. So there again, spooky things happening. But this one here is one of the weirdest things that I've ever seen. So my son, he was in high school, I believe, and he needed a laptop computer to be able to do some of his schoolwork on. So laptop was ordered. It was ordered from the manufacturer. I think it was HP, as far as I can remember. But for some reason or another, the delivery went to my wife's sister, which lived in another town, um, probably an hour from where we lived at. So the computer gets delivered to her house. Well, we go down and pick up the computer, still in the box, never been opened, bring it home, give it to our son, and of course he immediately starts working on it and trying to get everything set up. So he goes in, and I guess when you first get a computer, it asks you for your name, date of birth, and address, and all of this to set up the computer. So he puts all of his information in, and when he opens it back up the next time and turns it on, all that information pops up showing with his grandmother's name and her address. And there was something about the birthday that wasn't quite right. The numbers were off just a little bit, but he didn't put that information in. It just popped up on the computer. And he went in, changed it all because he wasn't really thinking that much about it. Changed it all back to his name, his address, and everything. Turned it off, turned it back on. Still pops up with his grandmother's name and address. He took a picture of it. I don't know if he still got it or not, but we actually did have photographic proof that this computer was showing his grandmother's name, which she had passed away. I'm not sure how long before that she had passed away, but still a weird thing to have that pop up on a computer. So it stays on there for probably like a week. And then one day he opens up his computer and boom, it was gone. His name and his information on the computer. Now, again, you got to remember, this thing came from the factory. No way it could have had her information on it. It was unopened when we got it, so no way anybody put that information on it. But when he set it up, it put that information on there. So I think that's about all we got time for tonight. That's long enough for y'all to have a few stories to listen to. And again, remember, if you got some stories, leave them in the comments for us. I'm sure everybody'd love to read them. And remember, y'all, if you haven't already, need you to go like, subscribe, hit that bell button, and if you would, share our videos with your friends. I'm sure they'd love to see some of these. All right, and hopefully here in the next few days, we're going to get us a cooking video on. And not sure yet what it's going to be, but we'll try to get something on pretty soon. So thank y'all for watching. Hope you have a good day and have a great Halloween.